Welcome to Ounce of Prevention, a podcast about current trends in Connecticut law and what they might have to do with you. In each episode, we'll focus on a specific legal issue and how it can impact your everyday life. The goal of the podcast is to educate and inspire our listeners to harness the law to make life just a little bit easier. I'm your host, Tim Herring. I'm an attorney at the firm of Chipman Mizuko Emerson LLC with offices in Danbury and Southbury, Connecticut. Welcome to the Ounce of Prevention podcast. I'm your host, Tim Herring. This week, my guest is Jennifer Curran, owner of the Johnson Stevens Curran Insurance Agency in Danbury, Connecticut. Welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. Jen, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and Johnson Stevens Curran?
Sure, thanks. Johnson Stevens Curran is an independent insurance agency in Danbury. It's family owned. My father owned the business for, 40 years probably. I took it over from him about 4 years ago. But a brief thing on the name, Johnson Stevens Curran, my dad was pretty young when he took it over. So he just tacked his name on to the end of Johnson and Stevens. We don't have any partners. Johnson and Stevens are long since retired, but we just kind of kept the name for longevity and recognition, I guess, over time. And that's the name. We are independent, which means that we work with several companies to try to find the best coverages and premiums for our clients. That's the difference of being independent. Our website is www.jscurran.com. And then a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Danbury. Never thought I'd be in the insurance business, but here I am. I actually was an athlete growing up, played a lot of sports through high school, and then played basketball in college and spent my first 5 years out of college as a college basketball assistant, which was so great. But when it was time to get out, my dad said, well, you can come work here until you figure out what you want to do next. And here we are 14 years later. So kind of a long intro, but that's a little bit of who we are and how I got here.
Excellent. You know, I'm sure that you do a lot of business with small business owners, right?
Mm-hmm, we do.
And as kind of you and I have discussed, small business owners have particular insurance needs. You know, they need to make sure they're protected so they don't have too much exposure in conducting their business. What are some common misconceptions that small business owners have about insurance?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest misconceptions are that they're paying all this, quote unquote, all this money for no reason. They're never going to need it. Maybe some contract required that they have it, but they don't need it. They don't see what their exposure is, or that they're paying all this money and the insurance is just not going to pay when the time comes. That they're kind of out to get them or going to look for every way they can to get out. And that's just it's not the case. Insurance policies are contracts, and the insurance company settles claims by the words in the contract. They're not looking to wiggle.
Right. And insurance companies can actually get in a lot of trouble if they wrongfully deny coverage. So
Absolutely.
They tend to stick to the terms of their agreement. I think it's fair to say.
They do. And I would say for a lot of people, it's more of a fear or a not knowing. Insurance is the big, bad, scary thing, right? Whether it's health insurance, business insurance. If you're not in the business or educated on it, it is an intimidating industry. And that's kind of where we serve our purpose as your agent. If you are a small business owner, if you have someone like us to call when you have a question or you're not sure, it's a lot more reassuring than having to call 1-800 and hit 8 prompts to get someone to tell you that they're not sure or submit it, and we'll ask. We may have to make that phone call on our end, but at least our clients can call us, talk to the person that they know, and try to get some answers or facilitate. It does happen sometimes they don't get a call back from the insurance company as quickly as they'd like. We can certainly try to facilitate communication, particularly in those claim environments.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because as I see it, and having dealt with this personally and have had clients, the input of an insurance agent is a big deal, because you're right. There's an intermediary between the insured and the insurance company. And without that, people can feel lost.
Yes, they feel very lost. And a lot of times that leads them to just do nothing rather than either put something in place in the first place, or it leads to erring. We prefer, I'm in insurance, we err on the side of caution. Other people let the fear sometimes of the unknown overrule them and just procrastinate and put it off. I'll do it next month. I'll do it next quarter. I'm not big enough. I'll do it next year. And that does tend to be a pitfall that we see sometimes happen.
Right. Now, one of the areas that you can provide value to your clients is helping determine not only the type of coverage, but the amount of coverage that they need. Because your clients may think, oh, I have coverage for that. But if the coverage is too low, they're still exposed.
Correct.
So how do you go about assisting clients with determining the level of coverage that's appropriate?
We try really hard to walk them through step by step. I mean, some coverages are kind of standard. Most of your liability policies are going to be $1 million, right? Most of your commercial auto policies are going to be $1 million on the liability side, $1 million. Your workers' comp limits are going to be within a 3-step, probably 3-limit kind of range. Where we try to focus them then is maybe on the umbrella. What's that going to drop down? Your liability. What do we need to go over? But really where they get tripped up is the property coverage. If you have a business that's got a lot of furniture or inventory, or it's a restaurant and they've got all their food in the refrigerators. So we just try to sit there and say, hey, it's, I'm in insurance, so it's always worst case scenarios. Hi, Mr. So-and-so. If you were to have a fire in here in your space tomorrow, look around real quick for me and tell me how much you would need to replace everything. And they may not be able to give me that number immediately, but that's how we start. That's where the conversation starts, and they look around and say, okay, maybe this file cabinet was this, that, oh God, I spent a lot of money over there. Do you have machinery? Do you have equipment? We kind of go through the list on that, but you do have to kind of walk them through a little bit to itemize and see what do they have.
Sure. People don't realize everything that they have because they've built up their business over time.
Correct.
I would imagine, that the numbers are bigger than people might think at first blush. I would think that's the case.
They are. And so that's, hopefully we try to stay in touch with our clients throughout the year, but even at renewals, if we can, to just try to touch base, try to get any changes that we can. But the biggest thing is kind of setting the expectation right from the start when we write the policy so that they know if you have any changes, let us know, whether it's an extreme change in payroll or you're having a phenomenal quarter and your sales go up, or you got a huge order and all of a sudden your inventory tripled. I can't know that if you don't tell me. So Gotcha. Again, it kind of goes to the relationship piece. We're part of your team and you have to just treat us as part of your team, and then we can do our part on the team.
Right. Right. Are there any kind of blind spots that you see that pop up with new clients that come to you where there's a policy that they should have had, but they didn't, but now you can set them up with one?
I do. Yeah. I would say right now, and this doesn't even go for new businesses or new clients, even clients we've had, I'd say the biggest blind spot right now is the employment practices liability. So if you have an issue in your business where one of your employees sues the company for harassment, wrongful termination, things like that, the blind eye comes from the business owner who says, no, my staff, we're like family. That would never happen here. We all get along so well. That would never happen here. And unfortunately, all it takes is one person having a bad day. What they say doesn't have to be true, but they can certainly launch a suit. And if you don't have the coverage for that, whether it's bogus or not, you want a policy to be able to defend you in that environment. So I would say that's a blind spot. And it's more just you want to believe in the best in people. And then you get caught sometimes in a situation where that's not the case.
Right. And even if, as you mentioned, even if the claim is bogus, lacks merit and was really not brought in good faith.
Correct.
It can take a lot of money in attorney's fees to take care of it.
Yes.
And there's always risk in litigation. That's why cases settle.
Correct.
So, I'm glad you brought that up. How about cyber liability? Because, in the news, it seems like every other day there's a story about a company getting hacked and, their password being stolen. And then there's a ransom request. So talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. So cyber, that's why I didn't mention it as the blind eye type thing. Cause I feel like if you own a business or you wake up and you open your phone in the morning and read the news, like you can't miss that. That's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous at this point. I would say it's a choice that some business owners are making, whether it's financial, they don't have the money for the premium, or they think they don't have the money for the premium. Because it may not necessarily be as costly as they think, but there are so many different types of policies and coverages available for cyber right now. it's probably the most quickly evolving piece of the industry because the hacking is constantly changing. So for the contract language and stuff to keep up it's been interesting to watch. But there are standalone policies for cyber. There are endorsements you can add to a policy that already exists with the liability with varying levels of coverage, whether it's like you said, Tim, that I got hacked and they stole my client's passwords. I'm being held ransom and they want 10 Bitcoins. They shut me down completely and I have to start all over again. And then each state, if you do get hacked, each state has laws about how now a business has to respond. You have to alert all your customers. You may have to get a forensic cyber person to come in and check your system, find out where the breach was. If you've ever gotten the letter yourself, it says, hey, we've been hacked, but we're going to offer you 1 year's worth of free credit monitoring so you can keep track of what's happening. That all costs money. Aside from the hacking and the Bitcoin and being held for ransom, just for you to do what you have to do by the state guidelines costs money. If you have 5,000 records and you have to alert 5,000 people and offer 5,000 people credit monitoring, that adds up pretty quickly, even if it's 1,000. So those are kind of the things that we talk about with our clients about the cyber.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up, the state obligations because they're onerous, on businesses. And that might actually be the primary reason why folks should have cyber.
Yeah.
Is because if there is a breach to comply with the law, there are a whole slew of things that businesses have to do. You got to wonder, statewide, are businesses really complying with their obligations, to do that because they are onerous. And the insurance policy, depending on how it's, the contents can really help with that.
Yes.
I'm not surprised to hear that it's constantly evolving. It's going to have to, moving forward.
Yeah. And I would say the hard thing with cyber too is you don't know you have a problem until there's a problem on that one. Like you're finding out after the fact that you've already been hacked. You're never going to get an alert like, hey, someone's dabbling or someone's thinking about it. Like there's no middle ground. Either you're not hacked or you are hacked. And once you are hacked, you have to comply with those. And that's where if you have the coverage, most policies are going to respond and they're going to take on those requirements for you. That's usually part of it. They'll help you figure out how to send the letter. It kind of circles back to that whole team thing. I know it sounds kind of hokey, but the agent can be his team and the carrier becomes part of your team in that kind of claim. And that's any claim, particularly in the cyber, trying to help you wade through those requirements that most owners don't know. What do you do? What's the first thing you do?
Right. Now, with cyber policies, do the insurance companies have requirements for what safety and firewall requirements need to be in place?
They are. They all have different applications, but I would say common threads across the applications they want to know are, even before you get to your firewalls and stuff, is your hiring practices. Do you have an application? Do you run background checks? Will you hire someone who has maybe a questionable history, right? Because maybe that person is going to be somebody who's going to try to access your data. And then it gets into your actual infrastructure. Yeah. Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you have a way to shut off, if you let someone go, are you able to immediately shut off their access to everything? Whether it's your system, a third party system, are you able to shut them down immediately so that they can't, again, be disgruntled and try to hack you there? So that's a lot internal a lot of the time before you even get to the external, the firewalls, your IT company, whatever other practices you have in place. You have to kind of start at home first and then work your way backwards.
Now, is there any type of coverage for business owners that your agency does not offer, or can you do the full suite of insurance products for a small business owner? Like workers' comp, for example.
Oh yeah, no, we can do all that. And we generally try to. It's usually in everyone's, not everyone's best interest, my best interest, but also a lot of our owners to be able to do everything in one place. So we can do from the liability to the property to the auto to the comp to the umbrella. We can do the benefits for them if they have employees and they want to offer health insurance, to the personal home and auto. I mean, we have a lot of clients where we do their business and then we have their home and their auto. It's two different people in my office that are going to handle those two different things, but one phone number, one place to call, one central location for everyone. There's very little that we don't do. I'd say if you get into some really specific doctor's medical malpractice, I haven't done that. I think that takes a real specialized knowledge to make sure that you have that done. But the rest of the stuff for the doctors, I write several doctors' offices for their business owners policies, the comp, if they own an auto. But there's usually specialists that do the medical malpractice, which would cover them if they amputate the wrong leg or something.
Sure. Just for a question out of left field, how about Uber drivers?
It's a really good topic.
Yeah, Uber business has been down a little bit for obvious reasons lately, but if someone wants to make a little extra money and drive an Uber, what should they be thinking about from an insurance standpoint?
Yep, that's a really, really good question. So there is, I'm going to call it a gap. Uber Incorporated, whatever their entity is, Uber does provide coverage for their drivers, but it kicks in, and I haven't checked this in a while, but the last time I researched this, and I think it's still true, is when you have someone in your car, right? You've gone and you've picked someone up and you're driving them from point A to point B. The gray area is, let's say you are driving for Uber, Tim, and you you turn your app on that you're available and you're just kind of driving around until you get your assignment, or you're on your way to go pick up your person and you get in an accident then. Well, now you're working for Uber, but you don't have someone in your car. So Uber's policy is not in yet. And your personal auto policy is going to say, you were using this for business, for livery transportation. That's outside of the scope of personal and auto insurance. We're not going to cover you. So back to the team environment, you want to reach out to your insurance agent, company, whoever you're working with, ask them, what, do you provide? Can I buy that coverage for that in between? Or I'm an Uber driver. Can you help me? And the agent or the company is going to say one of two things. Yep, you need a commercial auto policy that covers you for livery. So like you'd be classified the same way as a taxi driver or a limo driver. Or there are some personal lines companies that are starting to come out now with endorsements that allow for a little bit of Uber driving. There aren't many in Connecticut. I think maybe less than 5, but they're there. I will tell you, most people just do it. They don't tell their insurance companies anything and they cross their fingers and hope for the best. But it is an absolute exposure to them if something happens.
Yeah, that could be a very rude awakening. In addition to dealing with, just the nastiness of a car accident, if it turns out that you're not covered and, you're at fault.
And pretty much every unendorsed personal auto policy is going to have an exclusion for business use of that vehicle, like real business use.
Yeah, it's just another area where caution, an ounce of prevention, because if that driver called their insurance agent, they could have gotten the proper coverage.
Correct. And same goes for your Airbnb type of situation. It's basically the same discussion.
Yeah. So talk about how that, it would essentially just be the same thing, that correct me if I'm wrong, but if you rent your home to, out for Airbnb, there could be a coverage problem.
Absolutely. But again, there are companies coming out now with an endorsement. I ask a question now when I'm quoting homeowners, is this your primary home? Yes. That used to be good enough. Now it's okay, but do you rent it at all? Like a room, a garage or whatever? Yes or no. And some companies, I probably personally in our office, we have maybe 3 now that are okay with it. We just have to tell them, how many nights a year do you think you're going to rent out? If it's 20, 30, no big deal. If it's 350, that's not your primary home. That's right. Yeah. Really, so it's just kind of getting a sense of, is it one weekend a month? You're trying to just make a couple bucks, pay half the mortgage, whatever. Just kind of getting a sense of that.
Yeah. It's just another blind spot that I think a lot of people probably have.
Yeah.
You wonder what percentage of people, renting their homes VRBO, Airbnb, have really thought about the potential exposure. They rent out their house.
Yeah.
And there's a party that gets unruly, or maybe someone, has too much alcohol and they get in a car accident.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they're a defendant in a serious lawsuit for that. So it's another area where you really need to talk to an agent about that.
It is. And I think the biggest thing even that I'm hearing us talk about is circling back is ask the questions, talk to your agent, have an agent, because there are so many pitfalls. It may be a hassle on the front end getting it done, but you're going to be really glad you've done it right if something does go wrong. Right. And we've been talking small business. I think we're thinking, Main Street, whatever. But you also now with COVID and whatever, you have a lot of people with their side hustles or their home businesses, or maybe they've gotten into some of those, they're making stuff or selling stuff or teaching a couple of classes at home. And again, you want to get something for that home-based business. Are you taking credit card payments? Are you talking to people on Facebook and getting like, what kind of data do you have? Or do you have inventory, or are people coming to your home? Just those little types of things. It may not be an issue, but to make sure that it's not.
Right. It's the unforeseen things that make life difficult.
Yeah. And again, we can't foresee everything, right? But we can try to at least run through a list of here's the typical things we see go sideways, and what may also shut one business down may not affect another. If I'm working with a restaurant or someone who has a lot of personal property and I say, hey, a fire could shut you down if you can't work here. But then you may have your a construction business who just has a home office and no materials. A fire, God forbid, in their house isn't going to stop them from doing their jobs.
Right.
So it's really just evaluating on a case by case. You kind of look around and say, what could end us? Right. And then trying to walk it backwards from there.
Right. Now, I'm glad you brought that up. So talk about business interruption coverage for a second.
Yeah. I would say that, when you Google or I go to insurance company powwows, that's usually when someone has a claim. That's the coverage they say kept them in business while they were closed. A property claim. So again, I keep circling back to the fire, but that's the easiest one for us to use. But if you're a restaurant that has a fire that closes your business for 6 months, that's not really a business that could relocate somewhere else. Tim, if your office had a fire and your physical office was going to be under construction for 6 months, you guys could probably be up and running in a different office space to keep you going in the meantime.
Right.
There would be a cost for that, and the business interruption, if you had extra expense, would cover that. Right. But it's gonna affect you guys. It's gonna hit you a little bit differently than maybe a restaurant who can't really just go reopen another office. They kind of have to put in the time and do the work, and it's gonna take them the 6 months or whatever to get going. You still have bills to pay, right? You need to pay your rent, whatever, electric, utilities, insurance payments. Like, you have money that's still going out with no money coming in. So that business income and the business interruption is going to be really what keeps people afloat when there's no money coming in and money's still going out.
Right.
I'm guessing your next logical question has to do with COVID on that, but.
Well, yeah. And I was also just going to say that this is probably an area where people may have misconceptions. Mm-hmm. They may think, oh, I've got insurance. If there's a fire, I'll be okay. But, without the business interruption insurance, your place will get fixed. But there isn't going to be money coming in.
Correct.
So again, it's where you really need the advice of an expert. But yeah, let's talk about the intersection between business interruption and COVID.
Yeah. I think as you probably have seen, there's a lot of lawsuits flying around on that because I'm going to speak in generalities because there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Most business interruption, business income policies or endorsements or whatever, the coverages, the trigger on those has to be a covered physical loss to the property. And in all of, if look around, around here, the businesses that closed down in the beginning, right? Maybe restaurants were closed or whatever was closed or business shrunk in half or what have you, but there was no physical loss to the property. We didn't have the fire. A pipe didn't burst. And then there's also some policies have a flat out virus exclusion in them. So that right off the top knocks this out.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's common again. And that's kind of goes to that beginning part we were talking about. People think the insurance companies are out to get you. They're not. They just, it's already there. That was already part of the contract. There's a few, I think I read, I want to say maybe it was Wimbledon or one of those really large events had purchased a pandemic policy. I don't even want to know what they paid for it, but they had one and it paid, when they had to shut down or not have their event. I don't know if it was Wimbledon, but there was one large event that did have a policy in place for it.
Somebody had a crystal ball.
Somebody had a crystal ball.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? But the risk was probably perceived as so low that would be triggered.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm sure this is going to obviously be on everyone's radar from now on.
It is. I think the issue is going to be, it takes a little time for the insurance companies to figure out how do they want to handle this? Are they going to offer a new policy for it? The issue is going to be my guess is that it's going to be so costly that we're talking small business. Most small businesses aren't probably going to spring for it.
Right.
So we'll see. We're going to make this available to you, but it's going to cost, X, Y, Z. We'll see. Again, my crystal ball is a little blurry on this, but my guess is if and when this comes down the pike that it becomes available, I don't know what the adaptation will be on the small business level versus rolling the dice. And is this really going to happen again?
Right. Only time will tell with that.
Right. So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it becomes a $250 endorsement. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, on the legal side, more attention is being paid to adding provisions in contracts that deal with what happens in the event of a pandemic and the party's obligations, because the background law is vague.
Correct.
On whether the essential purpose of a contract has been frustrated or whether it's impossible for a party to perform. Mm-hmm. So the courts will have to work that out. Well, to kind of finish up, what would your overall advice be to a small business owner? I assume it's going to be call me.
Yeah,
there's a lot to discuss, right?
Of course. But I think it's call someone, get someone, find someone to work with that you trust, that you have a good rapport with, that you wouldn't feel silly calling and asking what you think may be a dumb question, but isn't. You want to have that relationship with someone so that when you do need them, you feel good calling them. I feel like when people have an issue or a question or what should I do, it's a lot different to be able to call someone that you've spoken to, met, maybe whether it's via video or not, versus just 1-800 and getting, kind of rolling the dice as to who you're going to get on the phone. And then maybe when you call back, you're not going to get the same person again, that continuity. I just think building that foundation, having the team and that person may change over the years. You may change for rate or have a falling out, whatever the case may be, but have a person, pick a person, have a person and rely on them and work together with them.
Right. And don't treat insurance as an afterthought. It should really be part of the, one of the things that business owners think about regularly and not just I got to check that box. It's more complicated than that. And, and that should give them peace of mind.
It should, think about when you buy a house, you're not going to buy a house and not buy homeowners insurance because you just spent all that money. You don't want the house to burn down and you're SOL, right? So your business is kind of the same thing. You're putting your blood, sweat, tears, and cash into this. And you don't want it to all come crashing down around you and not have put those provisions in place.
Absolutely. All right, Jen. Well, this has been super informative. I'm sure our listeners will agree. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast.
No, thank you.
Let's do this again soon.
Yeah, it was my podcast debut. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right.
All right. Take care, Jen.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Ounce of Prevention podcast. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic, please visit our website at www.danburylaw.com or call us directly at 203-744-1929. So you don't miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcatcher. This podcast is not legal advice and is for informational and educational purposes only.